Rock isn't dead. It's in flux. Hi, everyone. I'm Britt with Rock in Flux, and I am joined here today with Malcolm from Rock This Town Records, which is a record store here in Gilbert, Arizona. So, Malcolm, thank you for being here with me today.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you.
So, Rock This Town Records, you're located in Gilbert, Arizona, which is a suburb outside of Phoenix. What made you open up a record store? Can you kind of give me the background on how you all got started?
Yeah, I guess the kind of the comical answer is my wife is a native of Arizona. I am a Minnesota boy, and we moved here back to Arizona about 7 years ago now. And I've always kind of worked from my home office the last 22 years and stuff like that. So, and really didn't know that many people. So my joke is my wife and I opened up a record store to help me so somebody would come to my funeral. Get a chance to meet some people, right?
Yeah.
Since kind of live in a bubble world a little bit in some ways when you're working from home, and all my old friends are in Minnesota, or you develop friends by working online throughout the United States and throughout the world. So it makes it kind of a little difficult. And so far, so good. I think there might be some people that actually show up to my funeral. Based off of people coming into the record store. The other funny answer, I guess, would be we got tired of standing in line for Record Store Day. Like Record Store Day this year is April 22nd, kind of an annual event. And so that would be kind of one of the reasons. But I guess the real reason is my wife and I met because of music, and we, had vinyl. We're children of the 80s, and I guess you reach a certain point in your life where it's just like, well, if I'm going to do something, I got to do it now. Otherwise, it's never going to happen. So you just hold your breath and dive in and swim and see what happens. And if it works out, great. If it doesn't, so be it.
And so far, it's worked out for you all.
Yeah. It's been great so far. And it's early on in the game. We're only 7 months old, but slowly building a lot of friends, as I would call them. I would call them more friends than customers, because a lot of them are friends, in my opinion. And it's just kind of meeting people and, going to a record store where, it's not going to be a turnover of new people there every week, like so many businesses. And, there's a lot of record stores like that in some ways. Or if you go to a Target, it's very impersonal. You can't ask anybody anything there, and ask somebody, hey, when's the new Lana Del Rey coming out? And the guy's going to be like, I don't know, I never heard of him, but I'll tell you when the new Overkill album's coming out. So there you go.
So, that was interesting because I was looking up like vinyl record sales, right? And so because I knew that vinyl, it was obviously very popular in the 80s, and then the CD kind of came out, and for a while people didn't necessarily purchase vinyl, but then I guess in the early 2000s is when it started kind of picking up. People began getting another interest in it again. And I was going over just the metrics for record sales in the country. And I didn't know this, but there were $43.5 million in actual vinyl sales last year, which is, I think, was like 40% more than even 2021. And I found that really interesting because we talk about a lot on this podcast, the digitization of music, right? So we have all the streaming services and everything else, which is great because it makes it very accessible. But as someone who grew up, I was born in the 80s and kind of grew up in the 90s, going and buying the CD and owning it and having the artwork that came with it, there was a sense of ownership of that music. I think we kind of started to lose that when we went with the downloading and streaming and everything else. And I think that maybe the reason, and I'd like to know your opinion on this too, that vinyl started picking things up and then has even now continued to, is it's that idea of like, you have a piece of this art, you have a piece of something physical that you own, versus let me just go stream all of this music on Spotify.
Right. Yeah. I guess it's like going to a nice buffet and just looking at it or something, Right. It's just like smelling it and stuff. And maybe you get to taste a little bit of it, but you can't take any of it home. But I think for a lot of people, there's just, the CD cover art and stuff was fine, but it's just so small and compacted. And, reading the liner notes in a CD, the print has to be so small. That's one of the big issues. But on a 12 by 12 album cover jacket, I mean, yeah, it is a piece of art. And there's a lot of great art in album covers. It's kind of fascinating to see some of the stuff that's come out through over the years and is still coming out. So, but I think, yeah, it's just being able to hold on to something. You don't own anything. Right. If it's just a streaming service, whether it's a music streaming service or obviously an HBO Max or a Disney Plus or something like that, you just don't own any of those products anymore. And it would be nice, if you could find, the movies you want to see on a streaming service, but even some of those aren't available. Yeah. But at least with music, you can pretty much get all the music you want. Mm-hmm. And if you can't find it, you can definitely find it in a physical format. I don't know. And I think one of the things that's exciting to me is that so many young people, because there's so many people, like my niece just turned 23. She grew up in a time of all she knew was kind of just streaming and YouTube and stuff. And she's become, and not because of us, but she's just become a huge Vinyl fan, her and her husband. So it's just fascinating. It's fun that the Taylor Swift fans and the Weeknd's fans and everything like that are kind of leading the vinyl charge in many ways. And then they're going back and finding stuff that, it's just so many young people will come in and buy like a Lana Del Rey record, and then they'll come and they'll buy a Black Sabbath record. It's just like bizarre, but that's what a vinyl collector is. It's not just so hyper-focused as whether it's radio or streaming, a lot of people just become hyper-focused. Mm-hmm. It would be like me just living in the 80s and just listening to 80s music all the time, which I kind of did for a long time. But vinyl is like turned me on to, artists, say like Jane's Addiction and Pink Floyd and Kanye West, even though he's a little persona non grata these days.
Yeah. His music is, especially his earlier stuff is still good.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, and that is interesting too. That was one of the other things that I read, that actually a lot of the highest vinyl sales are not even older artists. They're current artists that are embracing, that whole medium and putting out records. So I find that very interesting. And I do think that there is something to be said. And it's great that kids that are younger who maybe are going for The Weeknd or Taylor Swift are finding that other music. And, the other thing I think driving that too are like some of these TV shows that have started coming out that are kind of going with that nostalgic feel of, the 80s, like Stranger Things and the 90s and older times. And it's bringing back music that these kids today maybe didn't even know about at all.
Yeah. And a lot of, I think in the early 80s, maybe around 82, 81, kind of the production of music kind of changed a little bit. Yeah. The sound became kind of modern, and that sound just kind of existed. So someone buying a Taylor Swift record, might be interested in The Cars or In Excess, because it kind of, the production was just so much better in the 80s than it was in the 70s. Now, the songwriting, of course, great in both decades and going back to the 60s and before that, but the production just kind of went to another level, which I think is the reason why so many people love the 80s. And then there's people like myself and my wife who love the 80s and love collecting that stuff. And then obviously there was the 90s and the 2000s where so much of that music was never pressed on vinyl. And people just want that music on vinyl now.
Yeah, it's true. I personally am a big 80s fan myself, and I've not gotten into collecting vinyl. It's something I've always been curious about, but so far the only pieces of my collection are all Billy Idol records.
Oh, nice. Love Billy. Yeah, Billy's great.
He's one of my favorites. So I have several of his albums, like in vinyl format.
Do you have his Christmas record?
No, I don't.
It's really good. It's really, really good.
I'll have to check that out. Yeah, but I think for me, I guess it's more of a nostalgia thing, because I would want a lot of that 80s. Like if I was going to buy vinyl, it's going to be, artists like that, just because that's also the music I tend to gravitate to. But, the interesting thing too, I think, is for people who are younger or older even, like the nice thing about going into a music store, especially a record store, is you can browse through physically looking at those album covers. And sometimes, that's something that back when there were more brick and mortar stores selling music, sometimes that would just be what piqued your interest to an artist. And you can't necessarily get all of that on streaming necessarily, depending on who it is and how much of their music is up and posted and everything. So I feel like there is something to be said for that experience of like actually going and being able to kind of like sift through records and see what you find.
Yeah, it's kind of like the line from Almost Famous where Penny Lane says, Kate Hudson
Mhm.
says, if I ever get lonely, I just go see my friends in the record store, you know?
Yeah,
It's
and I
just,
mean, we're so connected now, but it is very easy to be disconnected. And I feel like as an adult, as you get older, like, you know, when you're in school and things like that, it kind of creates an even playing field with people. So, like, when you're a freshman, you know, everybody's in the same boat. It's a new school and everything else. But when you're an adult and you're just kind of working or, you know, living your life, there's not necessarily that, you know, even playing field. And everybody has different interests and things like that. So it's harder to like meet people and become friends. And if you have something like a record store like that has that kind of familiarity and, you know, the vibe of, you know, this is like a friendly place, and yeah, I can understand why people would gravitate to it.
exactly. So, want to make new friends? You open a record store, or you go to a record store and
Right.
you just hang out. You talk music. You know,
Yeah.
that's what I always tell people. I mean, you don't have to buy anything. Just come on in and talk music. My wife and I love to talk music, and some of the people that help us out, they love to talk music, and yeah, it's just fun. You know, it's just awesome.
And so how's the experience been? I mean, and what made you all choose Gilbert specifically? Is that just kind of like the area you're already in, so it made more sense? Or, you know, how did all that come to be?
We're technically in Queen Creek,
Okay.
and we had looked at Queen Creek, but Queen Creek, unfortunately, it's just they're in such a growth phase. It's
Mhm.
hard for a small business to carve out a piece without a dentist office or a national or even regional chain
Mhm.
taking up that space, which is obviously driving up the rents for commercial space. And so it basically became a matter of numbers, and so it made sense to look in Gilbert since you know, Queen Creek is just in such a growth phase. It's just there's not enough property, and the demand is so high. That's pretty much the reason. And I think in the end, you know, I wouldn't change that because then I might not have met so many of the people that come into the store,
Yeah.
you know, because they're just like, well, they're close. And then, you know, you get people coming in. We got one woman that comes to visit her son from California, and she'll order records online, then come in and pick them up. And I'm
That's
just
cool.
like, well, that's so awesome.
Yeah. So obviously you have new records. How do you get older stuff in? Is it like do you get trade-ins? How does that work that you know, get a variety and mixture of different records?
Yeah, I mean, we're always buying records. I think what we're seeing now is that the 80s are really in demand for many reasons, like, you know, from Billy Idol fans to, you know, the Cars or Phil Collins. We can't keep a Phil Collins or a Police record in the store. Those, you know, the No Jacket Required or Synchronicity come in and they're right back out the door. But yeah, I mean, there's a glutton of 60s and 70s stuff right now because I think a lot of people who grew up in that time frame, and since that was pretty much the format of choice back in the 60s and 70s was vinyl records. What's happening there is the price of, like, somebody may think that, oh, I've got all these great records, and unless it's the Who or Black Sabbath or the Beatles, well, not the Who, sorry about that. Sorry, Roger Daltrey and Pete Townsend. I meant to say Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, or, you know, the Beatles. Artists like that, you know, those records are holding their value, but so many other artists like the Who and Kiss even, and some other stuff, and there's just a glut of that stuff. And now with people kind of in that age range where maybe they're in their mid 70s and life is catching up with them, if you know what I mean, and people are getting rid of kind of those vinyl collections. It's just the prices on those are being driven down and there's not as much interest. So, but yeah, to answer your question, I guess is that, you know, people come in or call about trading in records, or we'll buy the record collections. Obviously, 80s and newer stuff is preferred, but we'll look at some 70s stuff as well. Or, you know, we'll even go to people's houses and pick stuff up and take a look at collections too if they have a lot. You know, that's not a problem. So, but yeah, that's traditionally how kind of the pre-owned vinyl comes in, and then the stuff that we feel is of high quality, we'll clean it, we'll sleeve it, and then if there's any issues with the vinyl that we think there might be an issue, will play it. But you can't play every record because it was just physically impossible. You'd run out of time. And then anything else would be kind of considered like a $3 record. So there's stuff that kills me that's like a $3 record, but it's just like, yeah, this Who record right now is a $3 record just because there's so many of them out there. It is what it is.
Right. Do you feel that, because some people say that they listen to vinyl for the quality of the audio, do you feel that it's superior at all to other formats?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think the only thing that would rival it would be like reel to reel, and then like really high end CD players. I mean, they're talking like what they call SACDs, basically like super audio CDs, which I think could rival that. But other than that, no. I mean, you're going to get the warmth. You're not going to get that just that condensed. I mean, streaming is so convenient and beautiful, and most people aren't going to be too concerned about it because it's still going to sound pretty good. But you put on a record through a good set of speakers, you're gonna hear the difference, and it is a little night and day. You're gonna hear stuff you've never heard before.
Right. I did see, it was funny because I was on Instagram just yesterday. So it was funny because I had this interview on my mind, just thinking about things that I was going to talk to you about. And it was Stereo Gum had posted a reel, and I forget who it was, but someone handed him a record and they had their hands on like the actual record part of it. And he flipped out and said, no, you can't hold it like that. You have to hold it at the edge. And then your finger goes, in the middle. Because if you touch vinyl, you're going to mess it up. Are you that big of a purist? And I mean, is there a way that you should really be handling your records to keep them in the best condition?
Yeah, I mean, it's not really being a purist. It's the oils in your hands are gonna get into the grooves and stuff, and then it's gonna eventually cause some issues with the needle. It's gonna degrade the sound because the oil is just gonna lay over the top of the grooves and stuff. So the needle isn't going to be able to kind of pick up the true sound out of that particular area. So it's you should handle it by the edges. Now everyone's not perfect all the time, but do your best.
Is there a way? So if you do improperly handle it, how would you best clean a record off? And is there something that people should do in order to kind of maintain the quality of their records over time? Like, I'm completely unfamiliar with how to maintain those.
Yeah, I mean, we have our own kind of cleaning solution where we'll just use kind of a non-static cleaning rag and then, spray some of a formula. I forget, it's like mostly water and then hydrogen peroxide with a couple of drips of some other crazy formula, and just use that to kind of clean the records. And then there's record cleaning machines. You can get something as cheap as, $70, $80 up to hardcore collectors. They're buying $3,000, $4,000 cleaning machines that will clean the vinyl. And so get a little crazy there. I mean, it's an expensive hobby. I mean, we've got people that come in, that have suitcase turntables. We have people that come in that have $100,000 systems.
Well, I was going to ask you, so for the general person, are there any record player recommendations that you would say are, I guess, run the gamut of like something that's maybe not so expensive, but good quality, all the way to if you really want to invest in something like, do you have any suggestions for that? And also for people getting started in vinyl and maybe aren't aware of where to even start with purchasing something to play it?
Yeah, I would say a friend of mine just asked me this, and my wife and I have an Orbit Plus turntable, which is from U-Turn Audio right now. The only thing I don't like about it is that I'm a multitasker, and I just cannot sit and maintain a turntable. And this turntable in particular is you have to drop the needle manually, which is fine. That's not a big deal. But then you have to, when the side ends, the needle doesn't reset. And then if you want to go from a 33 speed to a 45 RPM, and that's not just with 7-inch singles anymore. A lot of the records now, to get a higher quality, are recorded at like 45 RPM instead of 33 RPM. So my wife's favorite record is Def Leppard's Hysteria from 1987. So the original version is 33 1/3. But the reissue, so there's just two sides, 6 songs on each side, but the reissue is actually 180 gram vinyl, and then it's only 3 songs per side. So you'd have to change the belt from one version of Hysteria from 1987 to the new version the reissue version of Hysteria from the last couple of years to 45 RPM. And changing the belt is a little bit of, it can get a little, well, we've spent a lot of money on belts so far because you end up stretching them and it's just not worth it. So, I mean, there's the Audio Technique, which can tie into Bluetooth, which is nice, unless you have Sonos. I think there's only one record player right now out there that works with Sonos, and it's a Victrola, called the Victrola Stream Carbon. And then there's other turntables, VPI and Project, that I guess would come to mind. So, but yeah, I mean, I think like a good starter turntable would be the Audio Technica, or I never know how to say that. Which is basically just like the AT60, which has Bluetooth, and it's a good turntable. It's a reliable turntable. Yeah. So
nice. So your wife's favorite record is Hysteria by Def Leppard. What would you say your favorite record of all time is? Do you have one?
It's Pyromania by Def Leppard, ironically. So hence how we met.
Oh, okay, cool.
We met because of Def Leppard. But yeah, I guess that would be mine.
Did you meet at a Def Leppard show?
No, we actually, way back when in 1999, met on a Def Leppard mailing list where fans would get back together and just kind of exchange just thoughts. And she had asked a question once of when Pyromania was released, and I answered, and we just kind of started a conversation. And I don't know, 6 months later, it led to a phone call, and here we are today.
Cool. So you have a record store. Do you at all, Phoenix gets a decent amount of shows coming through here, especially with like the legacy acts like Def Leppard and other bands that go on those tours that are maybe like the nostalgia type tours. Do you find that when that happens, you get more people in there? Or is there any tie into live music at all with your store?
There is. When certain bands come through, like Turnstile is kind of a new band. They came through, and you sell more of their records around that time than you do during certain other times. And it kind of ebbs and flows. It's weird because, there can be a weekend where we sell a bunch of Coldplay records and then don't sell another Coldplay record for like 2 months. It's kind of bizarre. I guess it's kind of what's in the news. And like you were talking about, shows like Stranger Things, Kate Bush, the Hounds of Love album, sold really well when that show first broke. The copies we had went out the door right away, and then it took a while to get the records repressed. I think that's the biggest issue in the record industry, is that there's just not enough pressing plants. And I think the big labels are reluctant to invest in new pressing plants again, just because they got burned back in the late 80s when that kind of stopped. There's just so much music that's just isn't on vinyl right now. And there's a whole market out of Europe. They'll basically take the CDs and they'll take the art and they'll press it. And it's called unofficial. It's basically just fake records, and the artists aren't getting anything from the records. And people will sell that stuff online. Some stores sell it. We don't sell any of that stuff unless it accidentally comes in, and we just don't even realize it until we've bought it. And it's just like, oh, that Rihanna record, Auntie, is not a real record. It's just a fake record. Or Frank Ocean, because Frank Ocean, I think, only sells his stuff online on his web store, and there's just not enough stuff that's pressed.
Well, it was like, I can't remember the name of the company, but it's one of the vinyl companies, and it was like a little bit of, and I haven't read about it. I need to go back and look it up, but they had always said that they did not create any records off digital copies of music. And then someone was doing some research and did a whole article about how not all of it, but some of it actually was off digital, in a technicality, digital versions of music. What's your thought on that? Is that like something that you would consider fake, or how do you all handle that sort of thing?
Yeah, that's Mobile Fidelity you're referring to. And they got in a little hot water last year about that. Their stuff is still superior to pretty much anything out there, even if it isn't truly analog. I know there's traditionalists that want it, if it's going to be analog, they want it to be analog. I get that. But I mean, as far as hearing any difference, I mean, if you're on a really, really high end system, and it doesn't have to be $100,000 system, it could be a $1,500 system or even a little more, you may be able to hear the difference between the digital and the analog. If it was sourced digitally instead of via analog. I think this whole thing came up because Mobile Fidelity was pressing like 40,000 copies of Michael Jackson's Thriller. And it's just like, taking the analog masters and turning them into the plates that become the vinyl. It's just like there would be so many of those that you'd have to use the master tapes of Thriller so many times because eventually the plates wear out and the sound starts to degrade. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's just, but for me, it's just like, I see the point and I understand it, but I'm just like, yeah, it's okay.
It's not a point that you need to like drive home. Yeah.
No. It's not like I have more of an issue with, an artist that puts their work forward and just because Frank Ocean or Limp Bizkit, just isn't pressing their records right now, or the record companies aren't pressing them. And some company in Europe is basically taking money out of their mouths, and making money off of that. It's just, I think that's where it's a little, because in a previous lives, I was making online video games and stuff. And so much of that content was stolen and put out onto the App Store and stuff. So I'm a little more sympathetic to seeing work pirated.
Well, yeah, because I mean, that's their copyright, essentially. They're publishing. You always want the artist to get something out of their art. Well, thank you, Malcolm, for talking with me today. I typically try to keep my episodes around like 30 minutes or so. So is there anything else you want people who are listening to this to know about Rock This Town Records?
No, I mean, not really. If you want to stop in, talk music, great. If you find something that interests you, great. If not, that's about it. The wife has helped with kind of designing the store. So we have some really cool curtains, I would say, the coolest curtains in Arizona on one of our walls. And then have this killer orange sofa and a killer rug that ties into that. Plus we have a little guitar there and an amp. So if anybody, usually it's the kids that'll plug in and play a little bit. But yeah, it's... as Viv Savage from Spinal Tap once said, have a good time all the time. And that's kind of the motto of the store. Nice. Actually, the motto of the store is life is short, buy the record, which is something that we came up with even way before we opened the store, because we'd see records and we went by them. And then it's just like, that happened to me with a Van Halen record once. And then the price shot up after Eddie Van Halen passed away. And then it also happened with an original pressing of the Shining soundtrack that I saw, and I've never seen that again. So I was just like, I should have bought that.
Gotta buy the ticket and take the ride.
Exactly.
But yeah, so I'm definitely going to come check it out in the next couple weeks. So thank you again, everyone. This was Malcolm from Rock This Town Records. You can check them out. You have a website online. You're also on Instagram. And if anyone is in the Arizona area, they are located in Gilbert. So thank you again, Malcolm.